The baby's wails cut through the first-class cabin like a siren at 3 a.m. Marcus Whitfield pressed his fingers against his temples, trying to maintain the composure that had built his tech empire from the ground up. Across the aisle, his 11-month-old daughter Penelope thrashed in her car seat, her face crimson with distress. Tiny fists beating against the restraints as tears streamed down her chubby cheeks. "Please, sweetheart. Please," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking with exhaustion. He'd tried everything during the first hour of this cross-country flight from Boston to Seattle. The bottle she'd refused, the pacifier she'd spit out, the stuffed rabbit she'd thrown to the floor. Nothing worked. His nanny had quit 3 days ago, the 4th one in 6 months, and now he was alone with a screaming child and the judgmental stares of every passenger within earshot. The flight attendant approached for the 3rd time, her professional smile strained. "Sir, I understand this is difficult, but perhaps—" "I know," Marcus cut her off, more harshly than intended. "I'm sorry. I'm trying everything." He was Marcus Whitfield, the Marcus Whitfield, whose face had graced the cover of Forbes twice before his 35th birthday. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals with Silicon Valley giants, convinced skeptical investors to bet on his vision, and built a company that employed 3,000 people. Yet here he sat, utterly defeated by an 11-month-old who wouldn't stop crying. Penelope's mother, Victoria, had walked out when their daughter was 2 months old. "I didn't sign up for this," she'd said, her designer suitcase already packed. "I thought I wanted a family, but I was wrong. I'm not maternal, Marcus. I never will be." The divorce papers had arrived within a week, and she'd relocated to Paris without a backward glance. No calls, no visits, no interest in the baby she'd left behind. Since then, Marcus had thrown himself into being both mother and father, but his demanding schedule made it nearly impossible. He'd hired a rotation of nannies, each one seemingly less capable than the last. The latest had handed in her resignation after Penelope had cried for 4 hours straight, telling Marcus she was clearly overwhelmed by her father's absence and needed professional evaluation. Now, as Penelope's screams reached a new pitch, Marcus felt the weight of every passenger's irritation pressing down on him. A businessman in seat 2A sighed loudly. A woman 2 rows back muttered something about entitled rich people who can't control their children. Marcus unbuckled Penelope from her seat and lifted her against his chest. Standing in the narrow aisle, he bounced her gently, swayed back and forth, hummed the lullaby he'd sung 1,000 times before. Nothing. She arched her back, pushing away from him, her cries growing more desperate. "Maybe she has an ear infection," someone suggested from behind. "Could be teething," another voice added. Marcus had checked all of this. He'd taken her to the pediatrician just yesterday. Clean bill of health. No fever, no ear infection, nothing physically wrong. Yet Penelope cried as if the world were ending. He caught sight of his reflection in the window. Disheveled hair, dark circles under his eyes, his $5,000 suit rumpled and stained with spit up. 6 months ago, he'd been on top of the world. Now he looked like he'd been through a war. The flight attendant returned with a bottle of warm milk. "Sometimes a different temperature helps," she offered kindly. Marcus tried again, but Penelope swatted the bottle away, sending it tumbling down the aisle. As he bent to retrieve it, he felt the aircraft hit a patch of turbulence. The seatbelt sign chimed on, and the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, asking all passengers to return to their seats. "Sir, you'll need to sit down," the flight attendant said, more firmly now. Marcus slumped back into his seat, strapping both himself and his still screaming daughter in. Penelope's face was drenched with tears, her little body trembling with the force of her sobs. He felt utterly helpless, drowning in a sea of his own inadequacy. That's when he noticed the woman 3 rows ahead. Turning to look back at them, she was in her early 30s, dressed simply in jeans and a navy cardigan, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her eyes weren't filled with judgment or irritation. They held something else entirely, understanding, maybe, or recognition. She unbuckled her seatbelt despite the sign and stood, making her way down the aisle with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The flight attendant moved to stop her, but the woman held up one finger in a gesture that somehow commanded both patience and permission. "May I?" she asked Marcus, her voice barely audible over Penelope's wails. There was no accusation in her tone, no suggestion that he'd been doing anything wrong. Just a simple question from one human to another. Marcus looked at this stranger, this woman who'd voluntarily approached the chaos he'd been trapped in for the past 90 minutes, and felt something crack open in his chest. Pride? Control? The illusion that he could handle everything alone? "Please," he said, the word coming out as a desperate prayer. The woman leaned closer to Penelope, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't try to take the baby immediately. Instead, she began humming, a melody Marcus didn't recognize, something old and haunting and impossibly gentle. Then she did something that seemed absolutely bizarre. She closed her eyes and started making a soft shushing sound, rhythmic and specific, like waves breaking on a distant shore. Penelope's screams began to falter. The woman opened her eyes and smiled at the baby. Not the patronizing smile of someone trying too hard, but a genuine, warm expression that seemed to say, "I see you. I understand." She held out her hands, palms up, asking permission rather than demanding. Marcus nodded, and the woman carefully lifted Penelope from his arms. The moment was surreal. His daughter, who'd rejected every attempt at comfort for the past hour and a half, seemed to melt into this stranger's embrace. The woman positioned Penelope against her left shoulder in a way Marcus had never seen before. The baby's left ear pressed against her chest. She continued the shushing sound, adding a gentle bounce that came from her knees rather than her arms. Within 30 seconds, Penelope's cries had reduced to hiccuping sobs. Within a minute, they'd stopped entirely. The silence that descended over the first-class cabin was almost shocking. Marcus stared at the woman, at his daughter's wet face now peaceful against this stranger's shoulder, and felt a mixture of relief and something he couldn't quite name. Jealousy? Gratitude? Wonder? "How did you—" he started. The woman turned to face him, and he saw tears tracking down her own cheeks. "I had a daughter once," she said quietly. "She would have been about this age. Would have been." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and loss. Penelope's tiny hand reached up and grabbed a strand of the woman's auburn hair, holding on as if she'd found exactly what she'd been searching for all along. And Marcus realized that this flight, this moment, this unexpected encounter, was about to change everything. Marcus watched in stunned silence as the woman continued to hold Penelope, swaying gently in the narrow aisle. The flight attendant approached again, clearly torn between enforcing the seatbelt sign and acknowledging the miraculous peace that had descended over the cabin. "Miss, I really need you to return to your seat," she said softly. The woman nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course, may I?" She gestured toward the empty seat beside Marcus, the one he'd purchased specifically to give himself and Penelope more space. "Yes, please," Marcus said quickly, sliding closer to the window to make room. She settled into the seat with practiced ease, Penelope still nestled against her shoulder. The baby's breathing had evened out, her eyelids drooping with exhaustion. Marcus couldn't stop staring at his daughter's peaceful face, a sight he'd begun to think he might never see again on this flight. "I'm Marcus," he said, extending his hand awkwardly across the armrest. "Claire Mitchell," she replied, shaking his hand with her free one. Her grip was warm and firm, the hand of someone used to hard work. No rings, he noticed, though there was a slight indentation on her left ring finger, where one had clearly been recently removed. "I don't know how to thank you," Marcus continued. "I've been trying everything for the past 2 hours. Nothing worked. And you just... Sometimes babies need to hear a heartbeat that isn't filled with anxiety," Claire said gently. "You were stressed, understandably, and she could feel it. Infants are remarkably perceptive that way." Marcus felt a sting of shame. Her nanny quit 3 days ago, the 4th one in 6 months. I thought I could manage on my own for 1 flight. "Where's her mother?" Claire asked, then immediately looked apologetic. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business. Paris, as far as I know. She left when Penelope was 2 months old. Decided motherhood wasn't for her." Marcus surprised himself with his honesty. He usually deflected questions about Victoria with vague references to an amicable separation. Claire's expression softened. That must be incredibly difficult. For both of you, I keep hiring nannies, but none of them work out. Either Penelope cries constantly with them, or they can't handle the hours my work demands, or... He stopped himself. Why was he telling this complete stranger his life story? You mentioned you had a daughter, Marcus said carefully, remembering Claire's earlier words. If you don't mind me asking, Claire's hand stilled on Penelope's back. For a moment, Marcus thought she might not answer, then she took a slow breath. Isabel. She died 4 months ago. SIDS. Sudden infant death syndrome. She was 7 months old. I put her down for a nap, and when I went to check on her, her voice cracked. She was gone. God, Claire, I'm so sorry. The words felt painfully inadequate. My husband, ex-husband now, blamed me. He said I should have been more careful, should have checked on her sooner, should have somehow known. Claire's voice was hollow. He filed for divorce 6 weeks after we buried her. Said he couldn't look at me without seeing what we'd lost. Marcus felt anger flash through him. Hot and immediate. That's unconscionable. The divorce was finalized last month. I sold our house in Portland, packed what little I wanted to keep, and I've been staying with my sister in Boston for the past 3 weeks. Today I'm heading back to Seattle, where I grew up. Starting over, I suppose. She looked down at Penelope, now sleeping soundly. I haven't held a baby since Isabel died. I've avoided them, actually. The sight of them would send me into panic attacks. Then why? Because when I heard your daughter crying, I heard Isabel, and I knew exactly what she needed. Claire's tears fell freely now. I couldn't save my own baby, but maybe I could help yours. The turbulence had passed, and the seatbelt sign chimed off. Around them, passengers returned to their books and devices, the drama of the crying baby already forgotten. But in seats 3C and 3D, 2 broken people sat in a bubble of shared grief and unexpected connection. What's her full name? Claire asked, adjusting Penelope's position slightly. Penelope Grace Whitfield. Penny sometimes, though Victoria hated nicknames. She's beautiful. Those dark curls and those long lashes. She's going to break hearts someday. Marcus smiled despite himself. Right now she's breaking mine. I feel like I'm failing her every single day. I'm building this empire, working 18-hour days. And she's being raised by strangers who keep quitting. What kind of father does that make me? The kind who's trying his best with an impossible situation, Claire said firmly. Do you know how many parents would have given up by now? Sent her to boarding school, or dumped her with relatives. You're on this plane with her, Marcus. You're fighting for her, even when it's hard. Her words struck something deep inside him. He'd been so focused on his failures that he hadn't considered he might be doing anything right. What do you do for work? Marcus asked, wanting to shift the conversation away from his inadequacies. I was a pediatric nurse. Worked in the NICU at Portland General for 8 years. After Isabel died, I couldn't go back. Every baby I saw was her. Every mother I helped was a reminder of what I'd lost. Claire looked out the window at the clouds below. I don't know what I'll do in Seattle. My sister thinks I should take some time, figure things out. But sitting still feels like drowning. Marcus's mind was racing. A pediatric nurse, 8 years of experience, someone who knew exactly how to care for infants, who understood their needs instinctively. Someone who needed a fresh start as desperately as he needed help. This is going to sound crazy, he began. Claire turned to look at him, one eyebrow raised. I have a guest house on my property in Seattle. 3 bedrooms, fully furnished, private entrance. It's been sitting empty for 2 years. He spoke quickly, before he could second-guess himself, and I need someone who can help me with Penelope. Not a nanny. I've learned that traditional nannies don't work for us, but someone who could be there, who understands babies, who could teach me what I'm doing wrong. Claire's eyes widened. Marcus, you don't even know me. I know that you got my daughter to stop crying when no one else could. I know that you're a trained pediatric nurse with years of experience. And I know that sometimes the universe puts people in each other's paths for a reason. He looked down at Penelope, sleeping peacefully in Claire's arms. I'm not asking you to decide now. Just think about it. Stay in the guest house, settle into Seattle, and see if maybe we could help each other. I don't need charity, Claire said, a note of steel entering her voice. It's not charity. I'll pay you a salary, well above market rate for childcare. You'll have complete privacy, your own space, and if it doesn't work out, no hard feelings. But Claire, I'm desperate. And unless I'm reading this situation completely wrong, you could use a place to land while you figure out your next steps. Claire was quiet for a long moment, her hand still moving in gentle circles on Penelope's back. Marcus held his breath, suddenly aware that he wanted this more than he'd wanted anything in months. Not just for Penelope's sake, but for his own. There was something about this woman, her quiet strength, her raw honesty, her ability to find purpose in the midst of profound loss. I'll think about it, Claire finally said. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why did your nannies really quit? You said 4 and 6 months. That's not normal, even for a difficult baby, Marcus sighed. The first one said Penelope cried too much. The second one I caught on her phone constantly, ignoring Penny unless she was screaming. The third one tried to hit on me at a company dinner, very inappropriately. And the fourth one told me yesterday that Penelope was emotionally disturbed and needed therapy. She's not emotionally disturbed, Claire said immediately. She's grieving. Grieving? She was 2 months old when Victoria left. Babies grieve too, Marcus. They form attachments in the womb, in those first precious weeks. When that primary attachment disappears, they feel the loss. They don't understand it, but they feel it deeply. Every nanny who comes and goes is another loss, another person who promised security and then vanished. Claire looked him directly in the eyes. Penelope doesn't need another temporary caretaker. She needs consistency. She needs to know that the people in her life aren't going to disappear. The truth of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on finding competent help that he'd never considered what the constant turnover was doing to his daughter. So will you help us? He asked quietly. Penelope stirred in Claire's arms, making a small sound. Claire looked down at her, and Marcus saw something shift in her expression. Pain mixed with hope, fear intertwined with possibility. Give me your number, Claire said. I'll call you tomorrow with my answer. 3 days after the flight, Marcus stood in his kitchen at 6 a.m, staring at his phone. Claire hadn't called. He'd checked his voicemail obsessively, refreshed his email every few minutes, and even wondered if he'd somehow given her the wrong number. Penelope sat in her high chair, surprisingly calm, smashing pieces of banana between her fingers, while the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound. His phone buzzed, and he nearly dropped his coffee mug reaching for it. A text from an unknown number. Is the offer still open? Claire. Marcus's fingers flew across the screen. Absolutely. When can you come see the property? The response came within seconds. Today, I'm staying at a hotel downtown and checkout is at noon. Come for breakfast. I'll send a car. He typed his address and hit send before he could overthink it. 2 hours later, Marcus watched from the window as a black sedan pulled through his gate. The estate sprawled across 5 acres of prime Seattle real estate, a modern architectural masterpiece that had been featured in design magazines, with its clean lines and walls of glass. Victoria had insisted on it, calling his previous house pedestrian. Now the place felt like a museum. Beautiful, but cold, filled with expensive furniture that Penelope wasn't allowed to touch. Claire emerged from the car carrying a single weathered suitcase and a backpack. She wore the same jeans from the flight and a different sweater, this one forest green. She looked small standing in front of his massive house, and Marcus suddenly worried he'd made a terrible mistake. This was too much, too fast, too desperate. But then Penelope, who'd been playing on her mat in the living room, looked up and saw Claire through the window. Her face lit up with recognition, and she began bouncing excitedly, making the happy babbling sounds Marcus heard so rarely. He opened the door before Claire could ring the bell. You came. I almost didn't, she admitted. I spent the last 3 days telling myself this was insane, that I was running toward another loss, setting myself up for more heartbreak. But then I kept thinking about Penelope's face when she finally stopped crying. The peace in it. and I realized I needed that peace as much as she did. Penelope crawled across the floor at surprising speed, pulling herself up on Claire's legs. Claire set down her bags and scooped the baby up, and Penelope immediately pressed her ear to Claire's chest, just as she had on the plane. "She remembers you," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "Babies have better memories than people give them credit for." Claire walked into the expansive living room, taking in the soaring ceilings, the minimalist furniture, the abstract art on the walls. "This is quite a home. It's a house," Marcus corrected. "I'm not sure it's ever been a home." He gave her the tour. 8 bedrooms, 10 bathrooms, a home theater, a gym, an office with views that made visitors gasp. Everything was pristine, barely lived in. Victoria's decorator had insisted on white carpets and sharp-edged furniture. There were no family photos, no clutter, no signs that a baby lived here beyond a few contained play areas. "Where does Penelope sleep?" Claire asked. Marcus led her upstairs to the nursery, a room that had cost $70,000 to design. The crib was a custom piece from Italy, the walls painted with delicate murals of swans and castles. Everything matched perfectly: the curtains, the rocking chair, the changing table, all in coordinated shades of pale pink and cream. Claire walked to the crib and ran her hand along the rail. "It's beautiful," she said carefully, "but it's very far from your room." "The nanny's room is right next door," Marcus explained. "Victoria thought it was important for Penelope to have her own space, and for us to have ours." "May I be honest?" "Please. This room is designed for Instagram, not for a baby who needs to feel secure. She's too far from you. The colors are too pale. Babies need contrast, brightness, stimulation." "And look at this crib," Claire pointed to the elaborate canopy draping. "This is a suffocation hazard." Marcus felt defensive for a moment, then realized she was absolutely right. He'd let Victoria make all these decisions, trusted the expensive designer, never questioned whether any of it actually served Penelope's needs. "Show me the guest house," Claire said. They walked through the manicured gardens to a structure that was modest by comparison to the main house. A 3-bedroom cottage with its own kitchen, living room, and a small deck overlooking the water. It had been built for Victoria's parents, who'd visited exactly once before the divorce. Claire set Penelope down on the hardwood floors, and the baby immediately began exploring, crawling toward a patch of sunlight. "This is perfect," Claire said. "But Marcus, I need to be clear about something. If I do this, it's not as a traditional nanny. I'm not going to raise your daughter for you. I don't want you to. I mean it. You're going to be present. You're going to learn how to comfort her, how to read her cues, how to be the parent she needs. I'll teach you, I'll support you, but I won't replace you." "That's exactly what I want," Marcus said. "I've been hiding behind work, letting other people do the hard parts because I was terrified of failing. But watching you with her on that plane, I realized something. I've been so afraid of being inadequate that I've become exactly that." Claire studied him for a long moment. "Okay, I'll stay, but we're going to set up some ground rules." They spent the next hour at his kitchen table, Penelope contentedly playing with wooden spoons on the floor between them. Claire was all business now, outlining her expectations. She would work Monday through Friday, 8 to 6, with flexibility for emergencies. Weekends were hers, unless he absolutely needed help. She wanted a written contract, clear boundaries, and the understanding that she could leave with 2 weeks' notice if it wasn't working. "And therapy," she added, "for both of us. I'm already seeing someone for grief counseling, and I think you should too. We're both carrying trauma, Marcus. If we're going to help Penelope heal, we need to be healing ourselves." Marcus agreed to everything. They shook hands across the table, and something shifted in the air between them. The beginning of a partnership, a fragile trust being extended across the wreckage of their respective losses. That first week was harder than Marcus had anticipated. Claire moved into the guest house and immediately began restructuring Penelope's entire routine. She moved the baby's crib into Marcus's bedroom, over his protest that he was a light sleeper and had early morning calls. "Then you'll learn to function on interrupted sleep like every other parent," Claire said firmly. Penelope needs to know you're there. She needs to hear you breathing at night. She threw out half the expensive toys Victoria had bought and replaced them with simple objects. Wooden blocks, cloth books, metal bowls, and wooden spoons. Babies don't need fancy toys. They need simple things they can explore safely. She insisted Marcus take Penelope to the office twice a week. You have hundreds of employees. Let them see that their CEO is also a father. Stop compartmentalizing your life. The changes were uncomfortable, disruptive, challenging. But slowly, remarkably, they began to work. Penelope's crying decreased. She started sleeping longer stretches. She smiled more, laughed more, reached for Marcus when he came home instead of turning away. 2 weeks into their arrangement, Marcus came home early and found Claire sitting on her deck, staring at the water with tears streaming down her face. Penelope was napping in the portable crib Claire had set up in the cottage. He almost turned away, not wanting to intrude, but something made him walk across the grass. "Bad day?" he asked quietly. Claire jumped, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry. I thought you had that conference call until 6. Cancelled." "Claire, what's wrong?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Today is Isabel's birthday. She would have been 1 year old. Marcus sat down beside her without asking permission. They sat in silence, watching the light dance on the water. Finally, he spoke. "Tell me about her. Please." And Claire did. She told him about Isabel's strawberry blonde hair, about the way she'd scrunch up her nose when she laughed, about how she'd loved bath time and hated getting dressed. She told him about the nursery she'd painted herself, about the songs she'd sung, about the dream she'd had for her daughter's future. "I keep thinking I'll forget," Claire whispered, "that her face will fade, that I'll lose the sound of her laugh. It terrifies me." "You won't forget," Marcus said. "Love doesn't fade like that." "How do you know?" "Because every day I fall more in love with Penelope, even when she's screaming, even when I'm exhausted, even when I have no idea what I'm doing. That love just grows. What you had with Isabel, that doesn't disappear. It becomes part of who you are." Claire turned to look at him, and something passed between them, something that went beyond gratitude or professional respect. It was recognition, the kind that happens when two people realize they see each other clearly, completely, without pretense or protection. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For giving me a reason to get up in the morning. For trusting me with Penelope. For not running away when I'm broken. We're all broken, Claire. Some of us are just better at hiding it than others." Inside the cottage, Penelope began to cry. Not the desperate wails from the plane, but a normal baby's cry. Hungry, or wet, or wanting attention. Claire stood to go to her, but Marcus caught her hand. "Can I?" he asked. "Can you teach me how you calm her down?" Claire smiled, really smiled, for the first time since she'd told him about Isabel. "Come on then." Lesson number 15, the 4-hold technique. They walked inside together, and Marcus realized that somewhere in the past 2 weeks, his empty house had started to feel like a home. 4 months passed like a carefully choreographed dance. Marcus had restructured his entire life around Penelope's needs, working from home 3 days a week and bringing her to the office on the others. His executive team had been shocked at first, but they'd adjusted. Some had even started bringing their own children in occasionally, creating an impromptu daycare corner on the building's 10th floor. Claire had been right about everything. Penelope thrived with consistency. She'd started walking at 13 months, taking her first steps between Marcus and Claire in the living room on a Tuesday afternoon. She'd babbled her first clear word, "Dada," while Marcus was changing her diaper, and he'd cried so hard he'd had to call Claire to come finish the job. But something else had happened too, something neither of them had planned for or expected. The professional boundaries they'd so carefully constructed had begun to blur. It started small. Marcus bringing coffee to Claire's cottage in the morning, the two of them sitting on her deck while Penelope played at their feet, Claire staying for dinner more nights than not, the three of them becoming a unit without ever discussing it. The way Marcus's heart would skip when Claire laughed at something Penelope did, the way Claire's hand would linger on his shoulder when she corrected his technique for burping the baby. They were falling in love, and both of them were terrified to acknowledge it. The breaking point came on a Saturday in late October. Claire had the weekend off, but Marcus had texted her in a panic when Penelope spiked a fever of 102. Claire had come immediately, her hair still wet from the shower, wearing sweatpants and an old college t-shirt. "It's probably just a virus," she'd said, checking Penelope's temperature again and examining her throat. "But if it goes above 103, we should take her to urgent care." "Stay," Marcus had said. "Please, I know it's your day off, but I'm scared," Claire finished. "I know, I'll stay." They'd spent the day on the couch, taking turns holding Penelope, monitoring her temperature, offering small sips of water. By evening, the fever had broken, and Penelope had fallen into an exhausted sleep in Claire's arms. "You're good at this," Marcus said quietly. They were sitting close together on the couch, the baby between them, the house dark except for one lamp. "So are you," Claire replied. "You've come so far, Marcus. 4 months ago you were a disaster on that plane. Now look at you. You knew exactly what to do today, only because you taught me." He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind Claire's ear, a gesture so intimate that they both froze. "Marcus," Claire whispered, "we can't." "Why not?" "Because I work for you. Because I'm still grieving. Because if this goes wrong, Penelope loses me, and she's already lost too many people." Claire's voice cracked. "Because I'm terrified of wanting something this much again." "I'm terrified too," Marcus admitted. "After Victoria left, I swore I'd never let anyone close again. That I'd focus on being Penelope's father and nothing else. But Claire, you're not just close. You're everything. You've become the first person I think about in the morning and the last person I think about at night. You've made this house feel like a home. You've made me feel like I can actually do this. Be a father, have a life, maybe even be happy again." "What if I'm not ready?" Claire asked, tears streaming down her face. "What if I can never love Penelope the way she deserves because all I see is Isabel? What if I ruin this?" Marcus carefully lifted the sleeping Penelope and carried her to her crib in his bedroom. When he returned, Claire was still sitting on the couch, her arms wrapped around herself. He sat beside her and took her hands. "You already love her," he said gently. "I see it every day. The way you sing to her, the way you celebrate every milestone, the way you protect her fiercely. That's not obligation, Claire, that's love. But I still miss Isabel. Every single day, I miss her so much I can barely breathe. You're allowed to miss her. You're allowed to grieve her for the rest of your life. Loving Penelope doesn't mean forgetting Isabel. It means your heart is big enough for both of them." Marcus squeezed her hands. "And loving me, if you even want to, doesn't mean betraying your daughter's memory. It means you're brave enough to let yourself be happy again." Claire looked at him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face. "I'm scared of losing you, both of you. I'm scared too. But Claire, I'm more scared of never taking this chance. Of living the rest of my life wondering what if." She leaned forward and kissed him, soft and tentative and full of hope. It was a kiss that tasted of tears and coffee and new beginnings. When they pulled apart, Claire was smiling through her tears. "We're going to have to renegotiate my contract," she said. Marcus laughed, the sound surprising him with its genuine joy. "I think we can work something out." They talked through the night, making plans and setting new boundaries. Claire would move into the main house, but slowly. They would tell Penelope the truth when she was old enough to understand. That Claire had her own daughter in heaven, and that loving Penelope didn't diminish that love. They would go to couples therapy, continuing their individual sessions too, making sure they were building something healthy and sustainable. 3 months later, on Valentine's Day, Marcus proposed. Not with a flashy public display or an enormous diamond, but quietly, in their living room, with Penelope as their only witness. Claire said yes without hesitation, and they celebrated by ordering pizza and watching Penelope try to eat an entire slice by herself. The wedding was small, held in the garden the following June. Penelope was the flower girl, scattering petals everywhere except down the aisle, making everyone laugh. Claire's sister stood as maid of honor, tears streaming down her face. Marcus's business partner served as best man, giving a speech about how he'd never seen Marcus truly happy until Claire and Penelope had come into his life. During the ceremony, Claire added a private moment that Marcus hadn't known about. She pulled out a small locket and opened it to show him a tiny photo of Isabel. "I carry her with me always," she said softly. "And I want you to know that loving you and Penelope doesn't mean I've forgotten her. It means I've learned that love doesn't run out. It multiplies." Marcus kissed her then, before the officiant could tell him to, and their guests erupted in applause. 1 year after the wedding, Claire gave birth to twin boys, Andrew and Benjamin. Penelope, now 4 years old, took her role as big sister seriously, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to bottle feeding. She told everyone who would listen that she had 2 baby brothers and 1 angel sister. On Isabel's birthday each year, the family would go to the beach and release biodegradable balloons with messages written on them. Penelope would dictate her message to Marcus or Claire, always something simple and sweet. "Hi, Isabel. I wish I could meet you. Love, Penny." Marcus sold his company when the twins were 6 months old. He'd built it to prove something, to himself, to Victoria, to the world, but he didn't need to prove anything anymore. He had everything he wanted, a family that was messy and loud and perfectly imperfect. They started a foundation in Isabel's name, supporting SIDS research and providing grief counseling for parents who'd lost children. Claire returned to nursing part-time, working with preemie babies in the local NICU, finding purpose in helping other families navigate those fragile early days. 10 years after that flight from Boston to Seattle, Marcus would sometimes think back to the moment when he'd been at his lowest point, overwhelmed, exhausted, convinced he was failing at the most important job he'd ever had. He'd think about Claire walking down that aisle, about the way she'd seen exactly what Penelope needed, about the courage it had taken for both of them to let each other in. Life hadn't erased their losses. Marcus still thought about Victoria sometimes, wondering if she ever regretted walking away. Claire still cried on Isabel's birthday, still kept that locket around her neck, but they'd learned that you could hold grief and joy simultaneously, that healing didn't mean forgetting, and that sometimes the most broken people could help each other become whole. Penelope grew up knowing her story, how her father had been desperate and alone on a plane, how a stranger had shown up with magic hands and a broken heart, how that moment of connection had changed all their lives. She told her friends that her family was special because it was built from pieces of other families, reassembled with love and patience and time. And on quiet nights, when the house was finally still and all 5 of them were asleep under one roof, Marcus would lie awake beside Claire and marvel at the beautiful, unexpected life they'd built together, all because a baby wouldn't stop crying, and a grieving mother did something unthinkable. She let herself love again,